June 16th, 2014. In the span of just 3 minutes, the small Nebraska town of Pilger was struck by not one, but two monster EF4 tornadoes, each powerful enough to flatten almost any home. Over 75% of Pilger was left in ruins. The middle school and church erased, families displaced, lives lost. Twin tornadoes of this size are almost unheard of, and even seasoned meteorologists struggled to make sense of what was unfolding in real time. How did one town become the bullseye for double catastrophe? And what really happened in those critical moments when warnings turned into chaos? The answers reveal how close any community can come to facing nature's unimaginable fury. Pilger, Nebraska, counted just over 350 residents before June 16, 2014. On that afternoon, the town's name became a national headline. Two violent tornadoes, each rated EF4, carved through the heart of Pilger almost simultaneously. The western tornado hit first, its winds measured at up to 191 miles per hour, strong enough to leave only slabs where homes once stood. The eastern twin, nearly as powerful, paralleled its path, doubling the corridor of destruction. In less than 5 minutes, Pilger's main street, its middle school, and one of its churches were reduced to splinters. Utility poles snapped, water towers dented, and entire blocks vanished beneath tangled piles of debris. The numbers only begin to tell the story. More than 3/4 of the town's buildings were damaged or destroyed. Families who had lived on the same block for generations lost everything in a matter of minutes. The official damage estimate reached over $20 million, a staggering sum for a rural village. 2 lives were lost, a 5-year-old girl in Pilger and a driver on the highway near Wakefield. Nearly 24 others were injured, many pulled from the wreckage by neighbors and first responders working in the chaos after the storm. The Pilger event stands apart, not just for its scale, but for its rarity. Twin tornadoes of this strength, on the ground at the same time and striking the same community, are almost never seen. National Weather Service teams, storm chasers, and meteorologists from across the country converged on the scene, trying to understand how 2 separate, violent tornadoes could have formed and tracked so closely together. The devastation was mapped in overlapping swaths, each path telling its own story of loss and survival. For Pilger, the impact was personal. The middle school, a hub for local events, was gone. The church where families gathered for weddings and funerals was leveled. Homes that had weathered decades of Nebraska storms were reduced to bare foundations. Yet amid the ruins, the community's resolve became clear. In the hours after the tornadoes, volunteers arrived from neighboring towns, cutting through fallen trees and searching for survivors. The recovery would take years, but the memory of that day, when Pilger faced not one, but 2 monsters, would shape the town's identity and its approach to disaster, preparedness for a generation. What happened in Pilger wasn't just a meteorological anomaly. It was a collision of rare atmospheric forces, a test of warning systems, and a measure of human response under unimaginable threat. The scars are still visible, not only in the rebuilt streets, but in the stories carried by every resident who lived through those impossible minutes. Hundreds of miles above the Nebraska plains, a sprawling weather system began to take shape in mid-June 2014. Moisture surged northward from the Gulf of Mexico, drawn along a persistent low-level jet. Dew points climbed into the low 70s, saturating the air from Kansas through eastern Nebraska. Above this humid layer, the atmosphere grew increasingly unstable. By sunrise on June 16th, meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, flagged northeast Nebraska as a zone of heightened concern. Their morning outlook placed the region under a moderate risk, signaling to forecasters and emergency managers that the ingredients for severe storms and tornadoes were coming together in rare alignment. The synoptic pattern behind the Pilger event was textbook for violent supercells. A strong upper-level trough carved into the northern plains, sending mid-level winds racing eastward at over 50 knots. This flow overlaid a deep pool of warm, moist air at the surface, setting up a sharp contrast that would fuel thunderstorm development. The vertical wind profile, what meteorologists call shear, was especially potent. Winds change direction and speed dramatically from the ground up, twisting the atmosphere and priming it for rotating updrafts. High convective available potential energy, or CAPE, signaled a deep reservoir of instability. By midday, values across northeast Nebraska soared above 3,500 joules per kilogram, a level that all but guaranteed explosive storm growth if a trigger appeared. The National Weather Service in Omaha and the SPC monitored these evolving conditions closely. Their text discussions highlighted the convergence of strong moisture return, robust instability, and wind shear, each a critical piece in the tornado puzzle. Forecasters noted the sharpening of surface boundaries, leftovers from overnight storms, which would act as focal points for new thunderstorm development. These boundaries, invisible but trackable on weather maps, often provide the final nudge needed to turn a garden variety storm into a supercell capable of producing long-lived tornadoes. By late morning, the corridor from Norfolk to Wayne and Pilger stood out as a bullseye. Model guidance and real-time observations signaled that any storm forming along these boundaries could quickly become severe. The SPC's moderate risk designation was not routine. It reflected a rare confidence among experts that the day could bring not just tornadoes, but the kind of powerful, long-track events that leave lasting scars. Behind the scenes, meteorologists weighed every update: temperature rises, wind shifts, subtle changes in pressure, knowing that even small details could tip the balance between a routine thunderstorm and a historic disaster. As the early afternoon approached, the stage was set. The atmosphere above northeast Nebraska was loaded, waiting for a spark. Emergency managers and local officials reviewed forecast briefings, aware that the coming hours would demand vigilance. In the background, the invisible machinery of the plains, moisture, heat, wind, and boundaries continued to churn, drawing Pilger closer to a moment that would test every layer of preparation and every line of warning. By late morning on June 16th, the atmosphere over northeast Nebraska was loaded with energy. Dew points hovered in the low 70s, saturating the air and signaling that the region was primed for severe weather. A broad east-west outflow boundary, left behind by earlier storms, cut across the landscape just south of Pilger. Along this invisible line, subtle wind shifts and pockets of pooling moisture began to sharpen, drawing the attention of both meteorologists and seasoned storm chasers. Surface observations showed a steady rise in southerly winds, feeding even more moisture into the boundary zone. The low-level jet, an underground river of fast-moving air a few thousand feet above the ground, intensified through midday, pushing warm, humid air northward and adding extra spin to the lower atmosphere. Convective available potential energy, or CAPE, climbed above 3,500 joules per kilogram. In practical terms, this meant the air was ready to rise explosively if given the slightest nudge. Storm chasers from across the plains began to converge on the Pilger area. Their radios buzzed with updates about wind shifts and boundary placement. In Stanton County, emergency managers reviewed the latest model guidance, which showed an alarming overlap of high instability and strong low-level shear right over Pilger. The outflow boundary acted as a magnet, focusing the day's most volatile ingredients into a narrow corridor. Chasers parked along rural highways, scanning the sky for the first hints of towering cumulus clouds. Their experience told them that wherever the boundary intersected, the deepest moisture, the strongest storms would likely erupt. Short-term weather models, refreshed every hour, consistently pointed to this zone as the likely flashpoint for supercell development. The models showed not only where storms might form, but also how quickly they could become severe. Local spotters and volunteer fire crews in Pilger and neighboring towns checked their radios and reviewed shelter plans, knowing that the day's setup was anything but ordinary. The sharpening boundary, rising cape, and strengthening low-level jet combined to create a bullseye, one that kept narrowing over Pilger as the afternoon approached. By early afternoon, the region's unique combination of moisture, instability, and focused wind shear created a sense of mounting tension. For chasers, this was the kind of setup that promised both scientific discovery and personal risk. For local officials and residents, it meant that every detail, wind direction, cloud movement, the feel of the air, could signal the difference between a close call and a direct hit. The stage was set, not by chance, but by a convergence of atmospheric forces that made Pilger the most likely target for what was about to unfold. By early afternoon on June 16, 2014, the atmosphere above northeast Nebraska was primed for eruption. At the National Weather Service office near Omaha, forecasters watched the radar screens as a supercell thunderstorm began to intensify southwest of Stanton. The latest scans from KOAX revealed a classic hook echo, an unmistakable signature of a rotating updraft, tightening with every update. Velocity data showed a rapidly strengthening couplet, where inbound and outbound winds pressed tightly together, a telltale sign that rotation was tightening near the ground. At 3:41 p.m., meteorologists issued the first tornado warning for Stanton County. The warning polygon stretched northeast, covering a corridor that included rural farms and the outskirts of Stanton. The text was direct. A tornado could form at any moment, and residents needed to take cover immediately. The warning gave a lead time of about 15 minutes for Stanton, and up to 20 minutes for Pilger farther down the storm's projected path. The workflow inside the forecast office was relentless. Each radar volume scan arrived every 4 to 5 minutes, but the storm was evolving faster than that. Forecasters debated the storm's motion, its rightward turn, a behavior that often signals intensification and a shift toward a more dangerous trajectory. The storm's forward speed hovered around 35 miles per hour, but subtle changes in direction meant the warning polygon had to be drawn with precision. Too small, and towns could be left out. Too large, and the urgency of the message might be lost. As the hook echo sharpened, the warning team coordinated with local emergency managers by phone and instant message. The radar's reflectivity and velocity products now showed not just one, but multiple areas of strong rotation. The possibility of more than one tornado forming from the same parent storm was rare, but the signatures were too strong to ignore. The warning text was updated to emphasize the seriousness. A particularly dangerous situation was unfolding, and all residents in the warned area were urged to seek shelter without delay. The issuance of the warning at 3:41 p.m. triggered a cascade of public alerts. Sirens, weather radios, local TV crawls, and mobile phone notifications. For the people of Stanton and Pilger, these minutes became a countdown. Emergency managers activated their protocols, volunteer fire departments stood by, and families began to move toward basements and interior rooms. The storm's right turn motion meant that its projected path was shifting closer to Pilger with every scan, shrinking the window for decisive action. In the background, the meteorologists at KOAX tracked the tightening couplet as it passed just southwest of Stanton. The storm structure on radar was textbook: hook echo, debris ball, and a velocity couplet all aligned. The warning polygon had to be adjusted in real time, reflecting the storm's changing course and growing threat. Each decision carried weight, as the next few minutes would determine how much lead time the downstream towns would have to prepare for what was coming. As the warning system did its work, the supercell continued to intensify. The radar's digital eye captured the moment that rotation at the surface reached critical levels. But for those on the ground, the only sign was a sky growing darker and a wind that suddenly shifted. The clock was ticking, and every second mattered. At 3:55 p.m. on June 16, 2014, the first tornado touched down southwest of Stanton, Nebraska. The sky had turned a sickly green, and winds began to whip dust across the open fields. Within moments, the rotating column of air deepened and widened, drawing debris from farmsteads and snapping mature trees as it carved a northeast path toward the outskirts of Stanton. For nearly half an hour, this tornado stayed on the ground, its tracks stretching across 27 miles of rural landscape. Farmhouses vanished in seconds, leaving only bare concrete slabs and scattered fence posts. Vehicles were tossed into ditches or twisted around trees. Along Willer's Cove North Drive and across the Elkhorn River, barns collapsed and grain bins crumpled like soda cans. Power lines and poles fell in tangled heaps, cutting off communication and electricity to dozens of farms. Livestock scattered or perished in the chaos, and the air filled with the sound of wind, breaking wood, and distant sirens. The tornado's intensity grew as it moved northeast, reaching EF4 strength. Well-built homes north and east of Stanton were leveled, walls flattened, roofs carried away, and only the most secure interior rooms left partially standing. Damage estimates for this corridor would later climb above $2 million, a heavy blow for families whose livelihoods depended on these farms and ranches. Some residents, alerted by the warning issued at 3:41 p.m., took shelter in basements or storm cellars. Others, caught on rural roads or working in fields, scrambled for cover in ditches or under machinery. The lead time was precious but short. For many, the only warning was the sudden roar and the sight of the funnel bearing down across open ground. As the tornado skirted the northern edge of Stanton, it began to show signs of cycling, a process where the storm's rotation tightens and then shifts, sometimes causing the original vortex to weaken as a new one forms nearby. The dying phase of this first tornado did not mean safety. Instead, it signaled the birth of something even more dangerous. By 4:15 p.m., as the original vortex faded northeast of Stanton, a new, violent tornado began to take shape west of Pilger. The Supercell thunderstorm, still charged with energy from the unstable atmosphere and the focused boundary below, was not finished. Its capacity for destruction had only grown. The residents of Pilger, watching the western sky darken and hearing the distant wail of sirens, were about to face a threat few towns have ever encountered. Not just one tornado, but two, each capable of erasing everything in its path. The 29-minute track of the Stanton tornado left a corridor of devastation, fields scoured bare, homes erased, and a community changed. But the storm's evolution was not a simple line on a map. It was a living force, cycling and regenerating, setting the stage for the unprecedented twin phase that would soon descend on Pilger. For the people in the storm's path, every minute mattered, and every decision would shape the hours and years to come. At 4:15 p.m., two massive tornadoes bore down on Pilger from opposite sides, distinct, violent vortices, each with its own churning core, both visible in the thickening haze. The western tornado, already carving a path of devastation, angled straight for the town's center. To the east, its twin twisted across open fields, tracking parallel and closing in. For a brief, harrowing window, Pilger stood between two monsters, each capable of erasing everything in its path. Confusion swept through the town as the siren blared. The main electronic system had failed, forcing firefighters to race back and activate the alarm by hand just minutes before impact. Residents had scarcely 4 minutes to react. Some ran for basements, others crowded into interior rooms, clutching radios and phones as the sky roared. The air was thick with dust and debris, swirling in unpredictable streams as the tornado's paths danced around one another. Even experienced storm chasers struggled to track the motion. One moment, debris flew east. The next, it spun north as the two tornadoes pulled at the landscape from different directions. The classic cues for safety were scrambled. With twin tornadoes in play, there was no clear, safe side of town. Some families, seeing the western funnel, moved east, only to find themselves in the path of the second vortex. Others hesitated, caught between conflicting reports and the chaos outside. The warning time, already short, was devoured by doubt and the sheer speed of the approaching storms. Within minutes, both tornadoes tore into Pilger. The western twin struck first, leveling the middle school and slicing through neighborhoods. The eastern tornado followed, widening the corridor of destruction and leaving behind a tangled maze of splintered homes, snapped trees, and downed power lines. For those caught in the open, the only options were to run, duck, or pray. The town was transformed in less than 5 minutes, a place cleaved by two simultaneous forces, each indifferent to the desperate choices unfolding in their shadow. Lisa M., who ran the town's daycare, heard the siren and didn't hesitate. She gathered all 8 children, toddlers and grade schoolers, into the basement bathroom, pulling blankets and pillows from the nap room as she went. The stairs shook under her feet. Down below, she locked the door, settled the children against the wall, and began to sing. The sound of her voice was steady, even as the house above them was torn away. When the storm passed, the only room left intact was the one they'd chosen. Not a single child was hurt. On Main Street, families scrambled for shelter in basements and closets. One mother grabbed her son and ducked into the bathroom. She pulled a mattress over them, holding tight as the walls rattled and the air pressure popped their ears. When the wind died, the roof was gone, but the interior walls had held. Next door, a neighbor who hesitated upstairs was caught by flying debris, suffering a broken arm before crawling to safety. For mobile home residents, the odds were worse. One woman, warned by a friend, sprinted across the yard to a neighbor's permanent house just minutes before the tornado struck. Her trailer was later found in pieces a quarter-mile away. Others didn't have time to run. Every mobile home in Pilger was destroyed or swept from its foundation. Survivors credited split-second choices, leaving for sturdier shelter, ducking into a friend's basement, with saving their lives. First responders faced their own decisions. The fire chief, after activating the siren by hand, rushed to help an elderly couple into their storm cellar as debris began to fall. Dispatchers juggled calls from all corners of town, trying to guide people to safety as lines went down and power failed. In those moments, every action, every choice, became the difference between life and loss. The tornadoes left silence in their wake, broken only by the sounds of alarms and shouts. Within minutes, volunteer firefighters and first responders moved into action, navigating streets blocked by downed trees and live wires. The main access roads into Pilger were tangled with debris, forcing crews to abandon vehicles and continue on foot. Gas leaks hissed from ruptured lines, and the smell of fuel mixed with dust and splintered wood. Firefighters worked alongside neighbors, pulling survivors from collapsed homes and checking basements where families had sheltered. The Green Lantern Bar, one of the few buildings left standing, became an improvised triage hub. Its owner unlocked the doors and cleared tables, turning the space into a command post. Injured residents were carried in on doors and mattresses. Volunteers handed out water, applied pressure to wounds, and tried to keep the injured calm until ambulances could arrive. With cell towers down and power cut, communication shifted to handheld radios and word of mouth. Dispatchers in Stanton County juggled a flood of emergency calls, prioritizing life-threatening injuries and relaying updates about blocked roads and hazardous areas. Requests for mutual aid went out to fire departments in Norfolk, Wayne, and Wisner. Ambulances and rescue trucks converged on Pilger, but many were forced to reroute as fresh reports of downed lines and unstable buildings came in. First responders set up a perimeter around gas leaks and marked unstable structures with spray paint. Search teams moved block by block, calling out for anyone trapped or injured. In the first hour, dozens of people were accounted for, but the search continued into the night. The urgency was constant. Every minute counted, and every decision could mean the difference between life and loss. Through confusion and exhaustion, the community's response was immediate and relentless. A surge of action that saved lives before the full scale of the disaster was even understood. National Weather Service surveyors arrived in Pilger with a clear purpose: to determine just how powerful the twin tornadoes had been. Their process followed the enhanced Fujita scale, a method that relies on forensic detail. Survey teams moved block by block, searching for the clearest evidence. Structures where only the slab remained, anchor bolts twisted or sheared. On South Murray Street, a well-built home had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a concrete foundation and scattered debris. This level of destruction matched the highest damage indicators for EF4. Not just collapsed walls, but entire houses swept away, their contents scattered hundreds of yards. Surveyors documented each ruin, noting whether a home had been properly anchored or reinforced. The town's middle school and church, both leveled to their foundations, offered further proof. A few buildings, like a reinforced concrete business and a basement with intact interior walls, stood out as rare survivors, examples of construction that resisted even extreme winds. Using aerial maps, drone footage, and ground photographs, the teams traced two parallel paths of devastation, each corresponding to a separate EF4 tornado. The evidence was unmistakable. Pilger had faced not just one, but two tracks of high-end destruction, each confirmed by the slab-only remnants and the mapped swaths of ruin that cut through the heart of town. Twin tornadoes are a rare product of the atmosphere's most complex machinery. In the case of Pilger, the supercell thunderstorm that spawned the twins underwent a process known as occlusion cycling. As one powerful mesocyclone began to tighten and draw in air, it started to choke off its own inflow. Instead of fading quietly, the dying vortex shed a pocket of rotation nearby, allowing a second, distinct circulation to form, close enough that both tornadoes could exist on the ground at the same time, each with its own violent core. This was not a single tornado splitting, nor was it a smaller satellite orbiting a parent. Both Pilger twins were rooted in separate, strong, low-level circulations, each drawing energy from the same storm, but spinning on its own axis. The local outflow boundary played a decisive role. It sharpened the contrast between warm, moist air and cooler, rain-cooled air, focusing streamwise vorticity along a narrow corridor. The result? Two zones of intense rotation, both anchored by the same supercell, but separated just enough to maintain their own destructive paths. For residents and first responders, this meant the threat was doubled. Visibility was compromised, debris fields overlapped, and the usual cues for safety vanished. In Pilger, the science behind twin tornadoes translated directly into a wider, more unpredictable danger, one that left little room for error and almost no time to choose the right shelter. Meteorologists use precise language to describe tornadoes, and the Pilger event put that vocabulary to the test. Twin tornadoes are defined as two separate tornadoes, each with its own distinct circulation center on the ground at the same time. Both Pilger tornadoes fit this definition: parallel, violent, and independently rooted in the parent supercell's low levels. This is different from a multi-vortex tornado, where a single tornado contains several smaller, rapidly spinning sub-vortices inside a larger circulation. In a multi-vortex, all those swirls belong to one parent funnel. Satellite tornadoes are something else again. A smaller tornado orbiting a dominant main tornado, usually weaker and clearly subordinate. In Pilger, both tornadoes were large, both reached EF4 intensity, and both left separate, mapped paths of destruction. Radar and survey teams confirmed two distinct, simultaneous damage tracks, each tied to its own rotation center. The Pilger twins stand as a textbook case for true twin tornadoes, not multi-vortex or satellite phenomena. On June 16, 2014, two EF4 tornadoes struck Pilger, Nebraska, destroying more than 75% of the town's structures and claiming 2 lives. Official National Weather Service surveys confirmed the rare occurrence of simultaneous, independently rotating tornadoes, an event documented on radar, in damage maps, and through survivor accounts. The lead time between warning and impact was just minutes, underscoring the value of local siren activation and immediate shelter decisions. While scientists have mapped the storm's path and measured its violence, questions remain about the precise atmospheric triggers that led to twin formation. Today, Pilger's recovery stands as proof of community resolve, and the event continues to inform emergency planning across the plains. Twin tornadoes remain exceedingly rare, but Pilger's experience affirms understanding warnings, having a shelter plan, and acting quickly can save lives when the unimaginable becomes real.